Assalamu alaikum, brothers, sisters, and friends. Welcome to a new episode of the GDM show, the Global Dawah Movement show. Today's show, we have brother Sabur Ahmed with us. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah.
Okay, good. So in today's show, we're discussing something very interesting, and that is a assertion that we're making, which is Richard Dawkins supports IRA's narrative. Now, there's a few questions that arise from this, and that number one, what is this narrative? And number two, how does he support this narrative?
Okay, I can answer the first one. The second one's going to have to wait to the end of the show.
Okay, so let's address the first one. What is this narrative?
Okay, our narrative is, when it comes to evolution, that a scientific fact isn't necessarily an absolute fact, right?
Yep.
And the counter narrative to this is evolution, Darwinian evolution is an absolute fact. Whoever challenges it is committing intellectual suicide, and it's written in stone. It's true and it's never going to change, and you know, it's a brute fact of reality.
Okay, so there's two questions that arise from what you just said. Number one, is evolution a scientific fact? And define for us what is a scientific fact.
Okay, so is evolution a scientific fact? Now, this is an area which there could be a lot of dispute. So there could be like, someone could say it is a scientific fact. Others would say, well, there's big problems with observation. Actually, you know, no one can see macroevolution in real time. And you know, we're going to get into this whole discussion about
generally speaking, for the case of this video, let's accept for the sake of discussion that it's considered a scientific fact amongst the majority of the scientific community, right?
Okay, that would be a fair way to carry on.
Okay, so good. So what is a scientific fact now? Define that for us.
Okay, scientific fact is something which obviously goes through the scientific method. So you have observation, experimentation, you know, falsification. It's confirmed or falsified, and then it goes through peer review, and if it's new knowledge, it becomes like a theory. And if it, you know, generally has a consensus in the scientific community, in scientific discourse, you'd call it a fact.
Okay, good.
Of science.
This being the case, is there problems with scientific facts? This is another other question we need to tackle.
I wouldn't use the word problems, I would say limits.
Okay, so are there limits to scientific facts?
There's limits, because it's very counterintuitive to think that a scientific fact can be wrong, because science has given us so much. It's given us, you know, cameras and iPhones and satellites and all those things. So you would think, no, a science will never change, or a scientific fact will never change. Yeah. But they actually do. Like, for example, in the beginning of the 20th century, there was a consensus amongst scientists, which was that the universe is eternal.
Yep.
This was the steady state model. And it was a scientific fact, it was a brute fact of reality. What actually happened after a few years, the Hubble telescope, we discovered the universe is expanding. So this scientific fact was wrong.
Right.
The universe was not eternal. It had a beginning some 13.7 billion years ago. Likewise, around the same time, Einstein's view of the universe, it prevailed over the Newtonian view of the universe. Okay. So you always have these revolutions and paradigm shifts and you know, changes.
Essentially, scientific facts change, right?
It's normal.
Now that leads me into another thing, which is that something's going on here, which is leading scientific facts to change, or allowing them that room to change. And this leads me to think there's something to do with the method itself, which is the scientific method. So there's some limiting factors about the scientific method itself, right?
Yeah.
One I think we can discuss briefly is the problem of induction, right? So maybe you want to clear that up for us.
Okay, so let's take the example of a scientist in Wales. So a scientist in Wales, he wants to find out what colour sheep are. So he travels all over Wales and he sees all the sheep are white. So he comes up with a hypothesis that the sheep are white. He tests it out. Every sheep that he sees is white. It's a scientific fact for him that sheep are white. Say this happens 300 years ago. There's no TV, no internet, nothing like that. Then he travels to, say, New Zealand. He comes across a black sheep, which is going against his current theory.
Yep.
So that's basically the problem of induction.
So,
when you get new evidence,
yep,
which goes against your previous evidence's conclusions.
And the problem there is that you're always limited to how many observations you have at hand, and based on those observations you make your inference, and there is room for error, because it's possible that the next sheep or the next 10 sheep in your example could be black or blue or pink for that matter, right?
Exactly. And look, there's some things that we could be so certain about. For example, scientists believed at one point that the sun was stationary, it didn't move. And anybody who said the sun had an orbit would be mad, would be
Right.
crazy, right? So anybody who was a Muslim at the time, and in the Quran it mentions the sun has an orbit, would be like, no, that's impossible. We can see the sun is not moving.
Yeah.
But again, when we discovered the universe is much bigger than we thought, the sun goes around the Milky Way galaxy in millions of years of, over 200 million years in terms of orbit. So, again, something that we were so sure about, because of the problem of induction,
Yeah.
it goes through a U-turn. And the interesting thing here is, Imran, it's not one or two things in the history of science in which there's a U-turn. The whole history of science is filled with U-turns.
Yeah.
And we think of science as a accumulation of eternal truths. It's not. And as it mentions in the introduction to the philosophy of science by Oxford University, that science is reversible. Hence, talk of scientific proof is dangerous.
Right.
Now, this is information which obviously the academics know, but the layman doesn't generally.
Okay, so let's sum this up. I want also to touch upon that. We only mentioned induction as one example. There's several examples, several limiting factors of the scientific method. Not to say it's a bad method; it's an excellent method. But what we're saying is appreciate it for what it actually is,
Yeah.
right? And I guess what happens when you do that is that you end up doing justice to the method itself once you understand its limits and its scope and so on and so forth, right? Now, understanding this, our narrative then, just to sum up, is that science as a methodology is a beautiful method. It works, but it's limited. It has limiting factors, and it can't give us 100% truth, right? Just based on induction itself, it can give us 0 to 99%. It can't give us 100%, right? And therefore, any theories that science promotes or proposes can't be 100% true. Therefore, they may be scientific facts, but they're not absolute facts,
Yes.
right? Okay. Now, understanding this, let's bring Richard Dawkins back into the picture. Where does the whole idea of Richard Dawkins supporting a narrative fit into the
Well, I think we
discussion?
need to play a video clip first.
Okay, let's play it.
Do you believe in evolution?
Do I believe in evolution?
Yes.
I believe that I don't have adequate information to even make that judgment.
Well, that's very sensible. Now, let me give you some adequate information.
Oh, please do so.
Okay. The evidence for evolution is absolutely solid. It's as strong as the evidence that the planets orbit. You do believe the planets orbit the sun, do you? Yeah.
Yes, I did science as a bachelor.
Okay, so that's a very interesting clip that we've just seen, where Richard Dawkins seems to be trying to convince Hamza that evolution is true and is almost as much of a fact as planetary motion is, right? I don't see him agreeing with the narrative in any way.
Well, in his book, he says the exact opposite thing. So on page 81 of
Which
A Devil's
book is this?
Chaplain
Okay.
is his book from 2004. We can now assert with confidence that the theory that the Earth moves round the Sun not only is right in our time, but will be right in all future times, even if flat earthism happens to become revived and universally accepted in some new dark age of human history. We cannot quite say that Darwinism is in the same unassailable class. Respectable opposition to it can still be mounted, and it can be seriously argued that the current high standing of Darwinism in educated minds may not last through all future generations. Darwin may be triumphant at the end of the 20th century, but we must acknowledge the possibility that new facts may come to light which will force our successors of the 21st century to abandon Darwinism or modify it beyond recognition.
Wow. So that's The Devil's Chaplain, page 81, right?
Yeah.
Now, that agrees with the narrative.
It's precisely what we've been saying. New facts can come to light which can totally change Darwinism
But
or discard it.
So in the clip he's saying the opposite, and he's disagreeing with our narrative, and in the passage you read, he agrees with the narrative, right? So he's contradicting himself, obviously. Exactly why we don't want to put words in his mouth, right?
But it's good he's supporting our narrative now.
Yeah, well, that's what the passage suggests, at least, and he uses the same example of
Yeah.
planetary motion, right? And it's very interesting. So nevertheless, I guess he agrees with us, right? So any concluding words that you want to say regarding this whole discussion that we've had today?
Well, the thing is, we've spoken about science, the scientific method, the limits of science, the problem
Scientific
of induction. Scientific facts can go through U-turns, and we love science. This is, I think, the point that we should end upon, that we're not saying science is bad, it's evil, it's always going to give you messed up results or something. No, it's fantastic. It's a great thing. It's a mercy from Allah. Now, do science, follow the scientific method. The conclusions that you get, just always remember, in a very humble way,
Yeah.
that it's part of the scientific enterprise
Yeah.
to always understand that there's more to discover, and there could be something that you discover in the future which goes against what you currently hold today, and we shouldn't be afraid of that.
Yeah.
And it should be an open discussion that we actually
I
have.
think that's the beauty of the method itself, and it's very important people understand this point, because I believe you can only truly do justice to a method when you understand its true nature. If you try to make it more than it is in your minds when you approach it, you're not going to be able to get the maximum benefit out of the method itself, right?
Definitely,
So I
yeah.
think that's a very important points that we've discussed, and people need to really understand.
And just one last point, we are going to, inshallah, publish a new book on evolution, and it is going to include some of this information that we spoke about in this video. So for anybody that wants more information, in a few months there's going to be a very, inshallah, good academic book on this.
Excellent. Jazakallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.